Good afternoon and welcome to award-winning Joe and Mike's Virtual Tours of Scotland. We're a bit further afield today. We're in the beautiful coastal village of Culross, spelt C-U-L-R-O-S-S, and from the Gaelic, it means holy promontory. So I'll go into a bit more detail about that. So what we've got here is the River Forth. We're just panning around at the moment, and Kurs, this pier. Now, the wooden pier isn't that old, but if you go further out there, it begins to become stone pier. And would you believe the pier dates back to the 15th century, to the 1400s and 16th centuries. So this has been a major destination, a major mercantile centre for many years, going back to the monastic settlement when the monks would go looking for coal, and coal would be sent out of here by ships and it would go overseas. Salt also was made here, and it was much in demand in the Low Countries in Europe. So this was a major trading port. There was also a royal borough given that status, David the Second,
First,
David the First. Thank you, Joe. So we're talking about the 12th century, really going back a long time. A royal borough meant that you could trade out with your own country, out with your own district, and hence international trade that was happening here.
So lots of connections with the Low Countries in Western Europe. So the Belgium, Netherlands.
Huge, yeah. So we're very much Europeans traditionally. If you look over here, you'll see the sun reflecting on the water, and out there's a little shadow in the water, a little bump, if you like, and it's a collection of stones, because this is all part of the interesting history. In the 16th century, one Sir George Bruce was a local merchant, and he got involved in mining. Traditionally it was the monks at the monastery from the 13th century, and they held ownership or mining rights, but he leased the mining from the monks initially, and then he bought the rights. And he was a hugely inventive guy for his time. He was much ahead of his time. And looking over there is what is called a Moat Pit, the Moat Pit, because the monks were giving up on mining coal, because they were, it was all going. The nearer areas to get coal in the landscape were all being used up. So he thought, well, under the sea is going to have coal seams, and he was absolutely right. So what he did is he started drilling down into the landscape and making a passageway away underneath the water. And where you see that little bump in the water is what's called a moat pit. Now, it was a little shaft, well, not a little shaft, a shaft that went all the way down through into the sea bed. And it went down 250 feet, would you believe, to access the coal. Now, it was a breakwater, if you like. They built a tower so that the rising water would not infiltrate, would not go up and down the hole, go down the shaft. Now, the shaft there was very important for the survival of the miners, because there was a lack of oxygen, of course, there as well. So you were beginning with an access to the mine on the land here, and then it would go underneath, tunnelling out there, ending up with the shaft. And then they would have what was called an Egyptian wheel. An Egyptian wheel was a couple of like cogs, if you like a mill system where horses would go and rotate and drive a pulley system which would take down buckets so that they could actually drain the mine. And we've got a picture of the Moat Pit here. If you can see, you can only see it at low tide, and it exposes this man-made kind of breakwater here. As you can see, the circular breakwater or tower, and this is just full of seaweed and silt and everything, because in the 17th century there was a huge storm and the Moat Pit was flooded, and it put an end to the underwater mining. But you can see some of the older systems of mining. This was called a bell mine system where the monks would drill down a passage down to the coal seam, and then they would start getting the coal from here, and then it would reach the stage where it was unsafe, it would begin to collapse, so they would just have to give up and go and find another one in terms of that. But you can also see the breakwater, the Moat Pit here, an illustration of that, of the system that was in use here, and you can see a boat which would be taking the coal as it was got out of there. It would be loaded on ships and taken away from here. And this was to do with this man, Sir George Bruce. He's just amazing, inventive, engineer, very much ahead of his time, industrialist. And if we take a little look over out into the water a little bit, maybe there's a railway line here. We maybe can walk over it. The railway line isn't in use. It would normally be to supply coal to the power station, which has now been decommissioned, Outlander power station, but it's not in use at the moment, so it's safe.
So it's fair to say that mining has got a long history here in Scotland. There are stories that previously where people would come up here and they would see the locals burning these magic stones.
That's right.
These stones could go on fire. A lot of it would be sea coal, because you would get the sea coal coming in as well. That'd be easily accessible. My father was a coal miner, by the way.
Yeah, the mining community is...
and I think the last underground mine going under the river here was closed in the 1970s.
Yeah, because there was the Seafield pit in Kirkcaldy, which was opened in the 1960s, and it was the first time the Queen had actually been seen in trousers, would you believe, because she had to wear a white protective suit and a white helmet, and that was quite an iconic moment when she opened that Seafield pit. So it was very common to get coal from underneath the sea, and still today there's huge reserves, huge coal seams down underneath here.
They flooded all the mines.
Flooded, yeah. But if you look out in the distance there, you're looking over to the likes of Bo'ness and Linlithgow on the other side of the water there, and you can see the remains of that 15th, 16th century pier. You see the collection of stones at the bottom there, like a breakwater. That was the original pier. And we take another view, and just beyond the sunlight on the water you can see chimneys maybe. That is a petrochemical refinery of Grangemouth over there. It's very cold.
Very windy.
It's windy and cold. So Outlander, the remains of Outlander power station, which has been decommissioned, but I think it's there's a biomass plant in that area today, which is all the rage, of course, and you can see the bladder rack, the seaweed here as well, loads of it. So we're just going to walk back over the railway.
One of the other big industries here was the salt panning, because salt was the only way that people could preserve their food.
That's right.
So a major industry here on both sides of the river. They would during the tidal peak, they would trap the tidal waters and let the water evaporate, and then scrape the salt off.
That's right.
Which they still do in the south of France. I've been down to the south of France in the Camargue area, and they still do that with the big salt pans.
Incredible. You just imagine what the air must have been like when they were doing that process here. It must have been very, very smoky and very unhealthy, and that process altogether.
So now we're going into the village proper.
Another thing that Culross is known for is iron girdles. Girdles, G-I-R-L-D-L-E-S. Get this right, G-I-R-D-L-E-S.
Girdles?
Yeah.
For cooking your scones on?
Scones, yeah. And they were produced here as far back as, would you believe, 14th century. Robert the Bruce, King Robert the Bruce, to keep his troops happy, they had to have their oatcakes warmed up, and they used these iron girdles. So that was a major production here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a map out to show you this little town plan of Culross, and we're going to trace our route where we're going.
We're going to see a lovely little route through this beautiful historic little village.
Yeah, here we go. So, oops, get this out. We're in a children's play park at the moment, and if I can keep this from blowing away, where we're actually at the moment is a pier. This is where we started our tour today. So what we're going to do is we're going through this play park. You see the swings, children's, all sorts of activities for the kids, cross over to go to the West Green, and then we're going to go past what we call Kurs Palace, which was the home of Sir George Bruce, who was talking about earlier, in connection with the coal mines. And then we're going to take a little walk at the front here, what's called Sandhaven, and then Joe's going to take over and he's going to tell you something about the area around the town house, and he's going to take a walk up the back causeway here. It's full of history to the Mercat Cross, so it'll give you an idea of the route that we're going to take today. Okay. If you've got any questions, feel free.
Somebody just mentioned the castle. They can see peeping up through the trees a little bit further out of town here. We're not going to cover the castle today, but you might be able to make it out. But we'll show you the mansion house as well. There's a mansion house,
and it's a mecca for filmmakers.
Absolutely.
The number of films and so on that have been made here are just astounding. And Outlander, if we've got Outlander fans there, the TV series, highly popular time travel series.
Also, the 39 Steps, the latest version of 39 Steps was filmed here. I just love the old-fashioned, not the old-fashioned, but the historic houses and the different colours they have. They paint them, but it's also bright and so inviting. Now this area is called the West Green, but look at these lovely little cottages here.
Amazing. Highly sought after. This place appeals very much to my artistic temperament. I'd love to have a house over here. It's so desirable, of course, it pushes up the house prices.
And so close to Edinburgh. We're only just literally across the river from Edinburgh.
Yeah,
we've got one of the locals here trying to get off the lead.
Commuting town. I've got a commuting village as well. Didn't take long to get to Edinburgh from here. So we're coming to a bit of restoration here. A bit of painting of the exterior of what is called Kurs Palace. Now, it wasn't a palace as such, what we expect a king or queen to have lived in, or a royal to have lived in. It was Sir George Bruce, and called the palace because in the documents of ownership at one point it says a palatial house, and it is in these amazing colours. We call this King's Gold, and it is this just wonderful warm colour. It is iron, it's got an iron content in it, and of course iron can be found in the area here, so another reason that colour is there would be to show that it was a person of importance that actually occupied this place. And you're getting a good feel for real time, what happens when the tour season isn't in full flow, with people getting ready for opening.
The palace is getting a spruce.
Yeah, furniture.
Getting a new lime wash put on it.
That's right. The lime wash, of course, was to protect the building from dampness. Very common when you see that in Scotland. We call it harling, or rough casting, a protective coating over the stone to prevent the dampness, to protect it. You can see that in the Highlands. You can see that in cottages up in Skye and places like that as well.
A lot of the distilleries you'll see in Scotland are also painted white with lime wash, it's the same idea, is to protect them. I used to tell people who come to Scotland that they paint them white so you can see the distilleries in the dark.
Yes, all good. You can see there's a pop-up cafe here, Bessie's Cafe, open for takeaway. We can have takeaway teas and coffees just now. We're still not allowed to go inside as such.
And we've got some of the local artisans who we were speaking to earlier.
Yeah, making a good job of
giving
that.
Giving the palace a bit of a spruce.
Yes.
Say hello.
Hi, international audience all over the place. Yeah. So there's all these wee nooks and crannies, with these little bits and pieces. But if you look up at the top there, you can see the pan tiles. Now this is something that takes the eye quite a bit, because It's not that common, but it's very common in the coastal villages of Fife, where we are at the moment. Now, the pan tiles were brought back from the Low Countries in Europe, and they were ballast, because when you were taking cargoes of coal and things like that out, and you were bringing your ship back again, it wouldn't be weighted correctly.
Yeah, so Mike, you're talking about the pan tiles kind of about using as
Pan
ballast.
tiles, yeah, because they're clay tiles, and it gives us a very much a similarity with Europe. If you've been to the Netherlands, perhaps Belgium, further afield than that in Europe, then you will see these pan tiles. So again, our connection with Europe and our heritage and connections, mercantile connections. This is reclaimed land here, just over here, where this football pitch is. Just over here was called still called Sandhaven today, but was part of the old harbour when Sir George Bruce was shipping his coal and supplies in and out.
The palace hopefully will be open quite soon. As I said, it's a merchant's palace. It's owned by the National Trust of Scotland, and it's open to the public, and they've got beautiful gardens at the back.
It was occupied as a merchant's house by Sir George Bruce in the 16th century, and we've got what we call the West Block, which you can't actually see. It's just behind that, the delivery van there. But that was more public. It was the older bit. It had a reception area. It had what was called an upper hall, where you would receive your guests, and also a withdrawing chamber, very much in the same scale as Craigmore Castle in a way, but a smaller version of it, where you would receive your guests and you would have all the preambles and room arrangements like they might have in a palace, but in a smaller scale. So that was more like your public area, just behind the van here. But if we move a little bit closer, and Joe can maybe get a view of this, the bit that's more visible, that is called the North Wing. And the North Wing would be the more domestic area, where your bedrooms and private rooms would be more. Now, the West Block is 16th century. This was the first part of the building, but as his wealth became greater, he needed a bigger place to receive and entertain, so he kind of moved his living area away from the West Block and into the North Wing, which you can see here. Now, Outlander fans may be aware of this, but it was used quite a lot in Outlander, the interiors especially, because the King's Chamber was the bed chamber used by Jamie and Claire when they came to visit in Cranesmuir. There's a famous scene where they are in the King's bed chamber. And also there is a withdrawing room in the West Block, which was used by Gellis Duncan. Now, I'm not going to say too much about Outlander. We'll say a bit more about it when we do the webinar, because I know that not everybody is an Outlander fan or familiar with what I'm talking about, but the interiors are just fantastic. And there's a painted chamber in there where the wood has got all sorts of picturesque motifs like flowers and fruit and various other like figures and so on, in the most amazing detail, and that dates back to the 16th century. The wood was imported from the Baltic. We were very much an international trading centre, and it was a cheaper way of decorating your house back then to have painted ceilings than it would be to import your tapestries and all your paintings and stuff like that. So it was a clever way around that. Yeah. So we know quite easily the dates of the building, because I can see, if you look up at the pediment, just on the right hand side, there's actually four like dormer windows up the top there, and the one on the right hand side has got 1611 on it, so you can actually see that if you got a bit closer. And this one has got SGB. It is actually the later building, which means Sir George Bruce. He was a Sir, he'd been made a knight, and the other one has got simply GB before he was made a knight. So that is Kurs Palace, not a royal palace, a merchant's house, a very beautiful one at that.
But James VI did stay in here.
He did,
He did.
yeah. James VI stayed here, yeah, absolutely.
You must have been terrified, had been a merchant in those days, waiting in a big royal entourage coming, because they didn't come on their own.
No.
You had to feed these people and feed their horses, and the king didn't come in, and never came on his own, so you'd always be terrified they would actually turn up. Don was just saying SGB or the Scottish Gas Board.
Scottish Gas Board. Yes, again, the close-deck gables as well. Of course, the royal family used to do what they would process. They would go on journeys because they weren't always at the same place. They used to inhabit different places for lengthy times as well, just as the pleasure took them. And it would also be part of the friend or the merchant paying tax would be to give the king his accommodation. So that was traditional back then too.
And it's also because it got a bit stinky around about the palaces. If they've been here for 3 or 4 months hanging around, because let's just say there's lots of ordure in these palaces getting thrown out. So give the opportunity to get them cleaned.
It did, absolutely, yeah. This chap here is a local lad, or was a local lad, going back to the 19th century. And he was Admiral Lord Thomas Cochran, and he was of a noble family. He was a mariner to begin with. Now, there was a bit of corruption back in these days, because at the age of 5...
Just a little bit of corruption.
Just a little bit. His name was put down for the Navy, and by his uncle, and by doing that, he was able to accumulate years of service, which he didn't actually have, but it was an easy way to get into quite a good position in the Navy. So at the age of 5, he was in the Navy, but he wasn't, if you know what I mean.
It's like putting your name down for the private schools in Edinburgh.
Yes, there's a bit of a queue.
He was corruption.
He was a very successful strategist, naval strategist, a very good shipman. He really knew how to ravage the French and Spanish fleets. And he was nicknamed the Sea Wolf by Napoleon. He was so successful. Now, in the 19th century, he was a knight, he was a lord, in fact. He got all the best because he was such a popular public figure as well. He was a bit of a celebrity too, and he ran for Parliament. He became a member of Parliament. He was one of the Whig party, and he supported parliamentary reform. He believed there was a lot of corruption, and also in the Navy, which didn't really suit many of his former colleagues, naval officers and so on. And he had an uncanny knack of making really important enemies. He had quite a short temper, and he challenged another fellow naval officer to a duel on one occasion, and that other person got injured, but he got off with it, right? He was involved in a great, what was called the Great Fraud, Stock Exchange Fraud of 1814, and it said that he was set up by his uncle, who was also a navalman, and he was stripped of his title, and he was fined because of that.
It was one of the earliest cases of insider dealing the stock exchange ever came across.
Yes, absolutely. It was going on back then too. And he, of course, the public loved him. And they got together and raised the money so that his fine could be paid. And Queen Victoria, she loved him as well. And she gave him back his knighthood and his honours and so on. So he survived and he came back to this area. So his uncle, of course, was a Johnson. And the Johnsons, if you go up to the Black Kirk, which I was covering earlier, or the West Kirk, you can see some quite elaborate tombs connected with the Johnson family. So his uncle was a Johnson. So we've got Admiral Cochran here in all his glory, this fine statue.
But he was also instrumental in the wars against the Spanish because he established the Peruvian Navy.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
a Brazilian navy.
He did.
Again, so he helped the South Americans fight against the colonial, which is ironic.
Yes, yes.
Because he was fighting for a colonial power.
Yeah, no, very important because he's held in high regard in Brazil and Chile.
Yep.
Because he helped with the fighting of their wars of independence. So as many Scots actually were involved with South America, and this is another example. The Scots really got around. Okay.
It's such a small nation, it's covered the world. Yeah.
So that's him, and we're going to change over.
Very interesting in their own right. And there's still some villages that you can pick up the names from. There's Pitodre, there's Pitodre, there's anything that begins with a pit. You know it was a Pictish settlement, and Fife is very famous for its Pictish settlements, so it was known as a kingdom of the Picts. Hence it's still called, I think it's the only place in the United Kingdom that still calls itself a kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the only county, so
Kingdom
it's a kingdom within a kingdom. And Fifers have got a very strong sense of identity. They always call themselves, I'm not from Edinburgh, I'm a Fifer. So people from across the water.
I'm a bit of a Fifer because I spent my formative years in Fife, and they used to say, take a long spoon to sup with a Fifer, which means watch out.
Never trust a Fifer. Never trust a Fifer. So I'm going to pass on to Mike, and then I'm going to say hello.
Beautiful views, the sun's coming out at the moment, yeah.
The sun shines on the right here, Mike.
Yeah.
The sun shines on the right here.
Yeah,
So I'm going to say hi, it's Joe here. Again, we decided to cross over the river, show you some of the little villages here. You've got your thumbs up, keep your thumbs up there, and Mike will give us some chat that you're coming up with as well. Just going to let this truck pull out at the moment. And I'm going to give you some stories that are probably more notorious with regards to Kurs, because Kurs has got a dark history, but it has an ancient history. So I mentioned the Picts. The Pictish history goes back for thousands of years here in Scotland. Now, unfortunately, they never left us any written history. We don't have very much written history, very little at all in the Pictish language. Most of it was oral. But what they did leave us with were some absolutely beautiful pieces of art. The Picts love to do their carving stones, and the standing stones that you'll see are carved. And we have a lot of them in the museums here all across Scotland, and some of them are still left in situ out in the areas where they stand. There's one particular one that I like here because the Picts are very good at picking up. And I mentioned before when we did the pineapple about the Roman invasion. Well, the Romans were trading with the Picts up here. In fact, there is one Pictish stone which has got all the Pictish designs, but the writing is in Latin. So the Picts were picking up the Latin language from the Romans as well. But they themselves did not leave us any written language. But we have so many stories of them, and I'll hopefully share a couple of stories about the Picts as well. Some of them are quite dramatic, but remember, they're passed on by word of mouth. But before we get to the Picts, the truck's gone now, so I want to take you to this place known as a Tron. If you were a royal borough, you would have a Tron. The Tron was your weighing station. And this is where at the marketplace you would come and you would get your weights to make sure that you were getting the right weight for everything. So this town here was trading in coal and salt and fish and everything else. So you'd want to make sure that what was going on to ships and off the ships was off the right weight. But also you as a local, if you were buying your oats, for example, or your flour, you want to make sure that you were getting the right goods for the money you were paying for. So the Tron would be this would be the mainstay here, and the balances would be on both sides. So it would be, think of it as a big scale, and the scales and the weights would be kept in the townhouse. I'm going to talk about the townhouse in a minute, and maybe if Mike can come across here, you can get a good idea of what the Tron was like. So you can see the main one here, and the weights here, and get somebody weighing out the goods. So the merchants would come and sell, and the locals will come and buy. However, Mike mentioned just a little bit of corruption. It was going on in those days as well. You would have a situation where you might go out and buy yourself, say, 5 kilos or 10 pounds of flour or oats for your animal or something, and you thought, wait a minute, this doesn't feel like the weight I'm paying for. So you could ask for it to be weighed at the public weighing station here. And if the merchant who sold you those goods was found to be guilty, their punishment for overcharging you would be to be nailed by the ear to the Market Cross. Now the Market Cross is further up in the village. We'll show you the Market Cross. Every town and village had a Market Cross. And so the merchants would be nailed. Sometimes they'd be nailed there for 2 or 3 days. And also they'd be pilloried, they'd be throwing things at them. So the merchants didn't want to hang around. So sometimes what they do is they would actually rip their own ears off and disappear. And these merchants would be going from village to village to village. And in those days they had long hair. So if you're going to buy some goods from a merchant, you could actually ask to look at their ears. And if their ears were intact, they were fine, it was good. They were genuine, you could buy products from them. If they had tears, then you know that they had ripped themselves off. So they became known as the rip-off merchants. Today, modern day, now you understand what we call when you go and buy a car and you get ripped off, or you buy something else, you get ripped off. They come from the rip-off merchants. This is quite common. And I'm sure if you've seen the Outlander series, I know we're talking about Outlander, because this is where a lot of it was filmed, you would see the scene where the kid gets nailed to the Market Cross and he gets rescued by the hero, by Jamie. He rescues the boy from the punishment. But it was well known in history that people would get nailed to the Market Cross as a punishment. Let's move on a little bit further to the townhouse.
It was a hard life back then as well, because I was just thinking the miners, there was what they called mining servitude, and it was the law that mine owners could actually lift like beggars and hawkers
and vagabonds
and just take them and force them into working in the mines. They had no option, and that was the law until it was repealed. So just think, I mean,
and it was the same in the Navy.
Yeah,
You have to, if you drunk the king's shilling, or you got shanghaied into the Navy. Again, you had no. If you were poor and itinerant, and you had to keep your eyes in the back of your head, because you were going to have a hell of a life. You know?
And slavery as well, where people and sometimes youngsters would be kidnapped and taken to the New World, and of course kidnapped.
Robert Louis Stevenson.
And that's another film that was made here.
Yeah.
I think the old film with Michael Caine.
I love that film.
Yeah.
Dodgy accent though.
I think David McCallum, the man from Uncle.
Ilya
Kuryakin was in that as well. We're giving our age away, folks.
I know. So I'm going to talk about this beautiful building here, the townhouse. The townhouse itself goes back to, again, most of the big buildings you'll see in this town go back to the 1600s. So this is 1626. The townhouse would be used, as I mentioned before, to keep the public weights for weighing all the goods, but it was also, as well as being a community hall, it was also a courthouse and it was a jail. Now, I mentioned before about the witches and how paranoid the Stuart kings were, especially James VI. I mentioned that he actually wrote the book on witches. Well, that continued for a while, even after James's death. So his sons, Charles, and just the population of Scotland, such a small population, but there was over 7,000 people died of being accused of being witches. Mainly women who were held in this townhouse. And they were actually held up in the attic area. So right up in the attic. Why would we kept up in the attic? Well, they wanted to keep them as far away from the devil as possible. So they were kept up there. Now, the townspeople must have heard these poor women being tortured, because the torture they went through would be ridiculous. And it's even said that even King James VI himself rounded up some of the witches who he accused of causing a great storm when his future wife was coming over. They nearly lost the fleet. And they said it was because of the witches. And he actually watched a witch being tortured in front of him. And he said written that he watched with glee. So all these women would be kept up in the attics. Now, kept up there, it'd be freezing cold in winter time and it'd be boiling hot in summertime. So the conditions were ridiculous. The torture would be ridiculous. I mean, they would have all sorts of inventive ways of trying to extract a confession out of these women. But there was one woman, her name was Lilias Addy, and she died. Now, whether or not she committed suicide, or whether she died of her injuries, but she died before she went to trial. But they were not going to give up on this one. They were so superstitious that they took her to the next village called Torryburn, and they buried her on the tidal estuary. So they dug a hole, when the tide was out, they dug a big hole, put her body in there, covered up, and they put a 1/4 ton slab of sandstone on top of her. So the superstition was that witches could never cross the water, so she'd always be held in the water, so the town would be safe. In the early 1900s, they excavated the grave and they took her remains into the National Library of Scotland. And I believe it was Dundee University who then made a digital map. So they made a reconstruction of Lilias. So she is one of the famous witches that was tortured and killed here in this little town of Kurs. And it was sometimes it was the church who were culpable. A lot of the times it was the church who were culpable because the church got money from these trials. And they would hire witch prickers who did have the needles to go along, like with hypodermic needle, and stick a needle in them. And they would say, oh, she never flinched. And if you never flinched from by being witch pricked, then you would be accused of being a witch. And your family had to pay for your trial. So there was money to be made. Also, it was also in terms of ownership, because women could own property in their own right, and but if you were accused of being a witch, your property could get confiscated. So there was all this thing. I mean, they had no legal protection whatsoever. Basically, if you were called a witch in any of these towns, get out of town. That was the only choice you had, because you were going to be for punishment. I was speaking to Mike earlier about up in Forres, the town up north. They've got this stone called the Witch's Stone. And what they would do would be they put the woman who's been accused of being a witch into a barrel, a pitch barrel or a beer barrel or a whiskey barrel, and they would drive nails into the barrel while she was inside. Close it up, take it to the top of a hill, and roll the barrel down the hill to make sure that when it got to the bottom, it actually hit the stone, so the woman would be impaled in the nails.
Double whammy.
Joyful, huh? So let's take a walk into the little village itself and show you some of these little historic buildings.
They didn't do things by halves then, did they?
Oh, no, I know. And it was interesting because this fear of the witches came after the Reformation, more or less, because you didn't hear much of the witch trials under the Catholic, when Scotland was a Catholic country. It's when it became much more paranoid under the new Presbyterian, the new religion. Things have got much more paranoid and bloodthirsty. I guess you could have paid the priest. Again, as you said, Mike, a little bit of corruption.
Yes.
So we're taking you up this little street here. It's called the Back Causeway, and beautiful village. But have a look at the cobblestones here.
They say the middle bit there, and I don't know if the guys can see that,
this
quite
here.
Flat on the bigger stones, that the wealthy merchants and powerful people could walk on the middle, and the people who weren't so important had to go to the side and give way.
Such a coincidence. This is witchcraft, because I've just been talking about Lilias, and you're part of an organisation that's to restore the reputation of the witches.
Yes,
Would you like to sit?
This is so bizarre.
But would you like to?
Part of the memorial.
Oh, hang on, they won't hear you.
Oh, they won't hear you. Hang on.
Do you want to? Yeah, I need to get the microphone.
This
on something.
is.
There you go. That's unbelievable. That's since the course.
Yeah. Mike, do you have a ruler on you?
I don't think I do.
I've got it.
You got it.
No, but I was doing some research on it, and your name came up on a couple of occasions.
In fact, you can.
So,
yeah.
well, let me introduce you.
Yeah.
This has to do with witchcraft, because this is so unplanned. This is Lindsay Martin.
Yes.
And Lindsay studied with us on the Blue Badge course back in 2012.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've just been talking about the witches and the witch trials here in Kurs. We're doing a film here, it's live. So you're broadcasting to the world here. So.
No, wait, this is live.
This is live. This is live on Facebook.
My
Oh, yeah, you're looking gorgeous. So, Lindsay, tell us a wee bit more about the organisation involved in terms of the restoring the reputation of the witches here in Kurs, if you could.
Well, it started a while back with remember a group of women. I get really nervous when things like this.
You're fine.
Who wanted to memorialise the accused witches of Scotland, and so it's kind of gathered momentum. So it started as a Fife group, but all over Scotland there's different regional groups, but this was a Fife group, and now it's grown into sort of wanting to get a national memorial for the accused women. And Kurs is important because it had 32 accused women in Kurs, and because it's such an historic village, and it's so integral to the part of Kurs' history, let alone Scotland's history. We recently got a memorial, the women memorialised here in Kurs, in front of the townhouse where they were tried, and so it's
I've heard that if you go upstairs in the townhouse there, that you get people get some really, really bad feelings up there. Yeah, that it's got it still has got this air of hauntedness.
Hauntedness. I was up with Kate Stewart, the local MP, who's been integral to getting this going, and Brina Kerr, who has done a lot of work and podcasts on the memorialisation of witchcraft and accusations. And I was up there with them, and we took a photo they took a photo. Who took a photo? I think Kate took one of Brina, and there's this lit cross on her face. Wow. It was really spooky. But you get that chill. I've actually felt in the doorway that I was being pushed out the courthouse. So there's definitely a feeling there. Yeah. Still.
That's great. I mean, so we're also covering the history here. We're talking a lot about the Bruce and Cochran, etc. But obviously, one of the main features here that a lot of people come here is for the Outlander. Now, you live in the village. What was it like? And I know that the new series has been commissioned, hasn't it?
It has.
Yeah.
Series 8.
I can't remember. Yeah, it's somewhere down there. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes on and on. Yeah.
And so, what's life like in the village while they're actually recording it here?
It's a really good crew, because they suss everything out really well, and they try not to step on everyone's toes. Obviously they're going to, but they're very generous with their donations, so that goes to the National Trust, but they try and do their bit. You're always going to get people that are like some people are more affected than others. It depends where you live and where they're filming, but they're generally really respectful, and it's brought masses of tourism to Kurs.
Is that good, or is it too much, or is it okay?
It depends who you speak to.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
It's the same the world over.
I think that's what we call the curate's egg, isn't it? The good and parts.
Yes. I think in general it's a really good thing. I think most people would say that. Yeah. Other businesses have grown out of it, and it's been a good, positive thing, and it's. Quite a popular show, isn't it? I think Scotland's caught on now to it, not just the rest of the world. Yeah. So, and it's brought up. It ties in with real issues like the witchcraft trials.
Indeed, it does. It brings the whole thing in. So it makes them more historically relevant to what's happening here, in not just in Fife, but throughout the rest of the country. Because we've been talking about the witch trials in various places that we visit. And just that we thought we'd come over here and talk to him as well. Listen, it's absolutely
fantastic,
amazing.
Pick it up with you.
It's so nice to meet you.
Yeah, we are flabbergasted because we have actually been trying to get in contact with you.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yes.
To do an interview with you.
It's all very last minute, but it's so good because we could.
Not really prepared. Sorry.
Not at all. They're loving you, Lindsay. I'm getting huge comments up here, and they're absolutely loving. Yes, you've come on and totally unexpected, and everybody's just loving it.
Oh,
yes, very good. Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I mean, this is just bizarre. This has got to do with Lilias. She's planned this for you.
Well, the last few years it's been really strange. I have noticed a lot of synchronicities happening since I've been involved in it on the periphery, but I have,
But can I also say, Lindsay, every time I come here, I see you. I've bumped into you, but various times I've come here in the little shop, in the cafes, I think, walking up the street. Yeah.
We need to swap
We do. Oh, listen, this is absolutely brilliant, Lindsay. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, all the best.
Are you doing the
We're just going to do a wee
Yeah,
walk
yeah.
up, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic. Enjoy.
All the best. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Cheers. How good was that?
fantastic. Yeah.
People think we're
Yeah,
going
yeah.
to. People think we rehearse these things. That was just
Yeah.
so coincidental. It's just unbelievable.
Yes. I think, reading Diane Gabaldon's analysis of, her sources and everything, I mean, there was a lot of Scottish people she drew on to get information, people like Lindsay and people like that, as you know, of course. I think you've met Diane Gabaldon.
I met her,
haven't you?
yeah. I went to
Yeah.
a lecture in Stirling Castle.
Yeah.
And Diana was there, and
Yeah.
so we talked a little bit about her research. And she does she does a lot of research. It's not just coincidental. She does a lot of research on the history. So she tries to. It is, although it's fictitious, but she does bring in some real good stuff about Scotland as well. The books are very heavy. They take up a lot of your time in your books. But the show's worth watching it. And if you haven't
Yeah.
seen Outlander, I'd highly recommend it. And everybody seems to fall in love with Sam Heughan.
Yeah.
Don't know why. Don't know what he's got that we've not got, Mike. Maybe it's a six-pack and buff. We've not got
We
that.
were auditioning, weren't we?
Yeah, we
we came near to getting it.
Yeah, we were the extras. I want to show you a little thing in this house here. Now, a lot of the houses here did fall into disrepair in the 1950s and 60s because once the industry, the coal industry in particular, once that fell away, there was no reason. There was no reason for these little villages here. And tourism wasn't what it is today. So a lot of the houses were then bought over by the National Trust for Scotland. We talk a lot about the National Trust. I love the National Trust for Scotland. And they bought the houses, and they bought them for peppercorn prices, but they converted them and did them, and then they resold them or rented them out. But they tried to keep it true to the tradition. And one of the things I'm going to show you here, if Mike can maybe come in a wee bit closer, is the original door knockers, where you've got the key. I'm not going to knock the door. But you got the key, and you just rattle the key up and down. So that would be you rapping at the lock there. So there's little pieces that they've kept, the little intricate details that I love about here.
We've got Lindsay on our chat now as well.
Lindsay's come on. She's quick. Hi, Lindsay. Lindsay, there's a few other people from the course who are on as well, so say hello to Brigitte, say hello to Alistair, all your exes there.
This is just, we're just saying about these stones in the middle, because they say that the powerful people with all the wealthy clothing and so on wouldn't want to get mud on their stockings and what like, so the poorer ones had to move to the side.
The poorer one to the side.
Yeah.
I would always be walking on, my people would be walking on the side, Mike. I don't know about your people. Your people were probably up the middle here with all the...
Oh, who knows? I'm looking at my family history at the moment, and I'm getting it's a bit scary to know what they were up to back then. So,
well, I know a lot of people go to the National Records of Scotland to look for their family history. In our family, we go to the courts.
well, I'll tell you, my family went over to Botany Bay and they made a fortune and came back, and I thought, do I want to look at this any further? I'm not so sure what they've been up to there.
So we're coming into the little square here. And
hi, Lindsay. Yeah, we've got, sorry. Yeah.
It's okay. Coming into the little square, this would be the main square, and this feature does... Now, we have mentioned, and this would double up as the village of Cranesmuir in the Outlander series. And so you're going to see all these gorgeous buildings, and then Mike just take a wee pan around. Little pan. And you see all these gorgeous little all the gorgeous little houses. Now, there's some major ones here, because we mentioned before about the religious history of this village. It's got an ancient history going back, especially with Christianity, going back to the 600s. And we're going to talk about a wee bit more about them in detail. Connections with various saints. We've got Saint Serf, we have Saint Enoch, and we've got Saint Mungo. Three saints. There's the monastic missionaries are based here in the 600s, and they were here to convert the Picts to Christianity. And we're going to talk a bit more detail about that, but just thought I'd give you a pan around. We're not going to do it all at once here. I'm going to give you a pan around. This view you're seeing here, this would be the scene where you see the witch, again another witch who appears in Outlander. Her name is Lilias, and this is the house that she'd be living in, so this is featured quite a lot. The Mercat Cross, the ancient Mercat Cross. If you were a royal borough, then you were given the rights to trade internationally, and this would be where your market would be. So this is called Market, or Mercat in Old Scots, Mercat. We'll talk a little bit further on another. We're going to come back. We're going to do, because it's so historic, we're going to do it in two goes. We're going to do a webinar on Kurs as well, to go into a bit more detail, to take you back to the sort of Christian hagiography, about the various connections with the monks, the connections from here, obviously to Glasgow as well, to the connection between the little village of Kurs to our largest city in Scotland. But we just thought we'd leave you with a little bit of the square here. If you've got any questions coming up, we would love to hear it.
Again, lots of great comments. Thanks, folks. I mean, it's such a pleasure to take you to such a beautiful place as this, such a historic. You feel as if time has not moved on. Yeah, you just feel as if you're back there.